Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are taking a look at the new Radeon RX 7900 GRE. So not the 7900 XTX or XT, but rather the GRE. For those of you who don't know what a 7900 GRE is, I suppose I'd better explain. But before I do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by ASUS Store and their new Locker Store 6 Gen 2 AS6706T. With its quad-core CPU, it offers easy backups to numerous devices and cloud services, and included is dual 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, which can be combined in SMB multi-channel for up to twice the bandwidth, and you can even upgrade to 10 gigabit networking via an add-in card. As for the software, you're not locked down with support for third-party operating systems, while the latest version of ASUS Store Data Master packs all the features you could possibly need, including iSCSI. We've populated ours with Seagate's Ironwolf 20TB drives, and with the health management software, we can ensure the drives are running optimally. Then, to maximize random I/O performance for content creation, we're using Team Group's T-Create SSDs. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so back on July 28th, so last month, AMD officially announced the Radeon RX 7900 GRE, which stands for Golden Rabbit Edition of all things. Bit of a super odd name there for a gaming graphics card, but I think the reason being that in Chinese culture, 2023 is the year of the rabbit, and the 7900 GRE, at least as we understand it, was initially intended as a Chinese market exclusive, and I suppose that's still mostly the case, and I'll explain why. It's only possible to purchase the 7900 GRE as a standalone item in China, so a do-it-yourself component. That said though, some other regions like Australia are getting the 7900 GRE, but there's a catch. You can only purchase it in full system builds. So despite having a $650 US MSRP, you can't actually buy it for $650 US in the US. You'll have to find a system integrator offering it. And here in Australia, there's just a single retailer offering the 7900 GRE, and that PC parts retailer happens to be PLE. So I went over to the website, configured the most affordable system possible featuring the GRE, and hit add to cart. Paid for the sucker, and then waited for the stock to arrive. And on a side note, I will say that PLE was great to deal with. They let me know the second the system was ready, and I went and picked it up. Raced home, ripped the graphics card out and stuck it in the 7800X 3D test system, and then got to work. In terms of specifications, the 7900 GRE is a cut-down 7900 XT, featuring less of basically everything. And although it's based on the same physical graphics compute die as the XT and XTX versions, and there are 6 memory cache die or MCDs present, just 4 of the MCDs are active. There's also just 80 compute units, resulting in 5,120 stream processors, and that's just a 5% reduction when compared to the XT, and 17% fewer than that of the XTX. Rather, it's the memory subsystem that sees the most significant downgrade. Firstly, there's 16GB of GDDR6 memory versus 20GB for the XT and 24GB for the XTX, and along with that you're only getting a 256-bit wide memory bus, so a massive 20% reduction when compared to the XT, and with slower 18 gigabits per second memory you are looking at just 576 gigabytes of memory bandwidth, and that's 28% less than that of the XT. So although the GRE uses the Navi 31 die, it's significantly cut down and probably shouldn't be part of the 7900 series, but I suppose that's a debate for another day. What I want to know right now is, how much slower is the 7900 GRE than the XT, and does it make sense to buy in a pre-built system or as a do-it-yourself product in China? Well, of course, we're going to find out, and for testing we're using our Ryzen 7 7800X 3D test system with 32GB of DDR5 6000 memory using the latest display drivers. Now, all data has been validated and updated for this video, and later next week I'll have a full GPU breakdown for you, including all of the current and previous generation models, but for now we have enough data to work out where the 7900 GRE stands. Now in total I have tested 15 games, but we'll only look at the individual results for half a dozen of them before checking out the 15 game average. And then of course, we'll take a look at the cost per frame data. But please note, all graphs will be made available to Floatplane and Patreon members. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got. First up, we have The Last of Us Part 1, and here the GRE managed 79 FPS at 1440p, making it just 4% faster than the 6800 XT. So that already makes me wonder, why is this a 7900 class product? It was also 5% slower than the 6950 XT and 11% slower than the 4070 Ti, though it was 8% faster than the plain old 4070. Then when compared to the 7900 XT, we're looking at a 20% reduction in performance, so probably about what you'd expect based on the specs. Then at the 4K resolution, we're looking at 45 FPS on average, which is RTX 3080, 6950 XT, and 4070 Ti-like performance, so not amazing, and this time it was 21% slower than the 7900 XT. Next up, we have Resident Evil 4, and here the GRE was good for 132 FPS at 1440p, which again means RTX 3080 and 6800 XT levels of performance. In this example though, it was just 15% slower than the 7900 XT, but based on what we've seen so far, the 7900 GRE is looking like a slightly updated 6800 XT with the exact same MSRP. It's also able to best the 6800 XT by an 8% margin at 4K, and was just 14% slower than the 7900 XT. So overall, not a bad result I guess, or at least this is about the best you could hope for. We're seeing 145 FPS on average in Forza Horizon 5 at 1440p, which is again very much 6800 XT-like performance, and in this example that means it's just 9% slower than the 7900 XT. AMD has made some driver improvements to help RDNA 3's Forza performance, but relative to RDNA 2, the results still aren't amazing. And things look a little bit better at 4K, and now the 7900 GRE is able to roughly match the RTX 4070 Ti, making it 10% faster than the 6800 XT, and just 5% slower than the 7900 XT, which is interesting. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy, we find that the GRE averaged 93 FPS at 1440p, which made it a mere 3% faster than the RTX 3080 and 7% faster than the 6800 XT. It was, however, 18% slower than the 7900 XT, which makes sense, and relative to the 4070 Ti, the performance did look pretty good. Interestingly though, at 4K, the RTX 3080 was able to match the GRE, but also the margin to the 4070 Ti was reduced to just a few frames. Then, when compared to the 7900 XT, the GRE was 20% slower, so again, pretty much what you'd expect based on the specs. The Fortnite performance isn't exactly amazing, just 117 FPS on average at 1440p, making the GRE slower than just about everything, basically only matching the 6800 XT and RTX 4070 to come in 21% slower than the 7900 XT. And the 4K data was really no better. Again, we're looking at RTX 3080/6800 XT performance, which again makes it 20% slower than the 7900 XT. The last game I'm going to look at the individual data for is A Plague Tale Requiem, and here the 7900 GRE spat out 92 FPS at 1440p, and that made it just 5% faster than the 6800 XT and RTX 3080, and 18% slower than the 7900 XT. Then at the 4K resolution, it slipped behind the 6800 XT and was again 18% slower than the 7900 XT. And then performance relative to the RTX 4070 Ti was good, and with 17% more frames than the standard 4070, Nvidia's 4070 series does a pretty good job of making the GRE look like a lot better than it actually is. Okay, so here's the 15 game average data at 1440p, and on average the 7900 GRE managed 113 FPS, which as we saw time and time again means that it roughly matched the RTX 3080 and 6800 XT in terms of performance, beating the 3080 by a mere 5% and the 6800 XT by 8%. It was also 11% faster than the RTX 4070, and according to the MSRP it should cost around 8% more. Then when compared to the 7900 XT, you're looking at 19% fewer frames on average, while it was 12% slower than the 4070 Ti. Then upping the resolution to 4K doesn't really change much, it's still 18% slower than the 7900 XT, 5% faster than the RTX 3080, and 10% faster than the 6800 XT. So essentially, you're getting an updated 6800 XT, almost 3 years later, offering about 10% more performance and probably better power efficiency, which we'll look at in a moment. Before that though, I want to focus on the cost per frame data, and we'll start with the MSRP. The funny thing about the 7900 GRE is that it's actually by far the best value high-end RDNA 3 GPU that AMD's released, and ironically they kind of haven't released it, given you can't just go and buy one outside of China of course. At a cost of $5.75 per frame, it's slightly better value than Nvidia's best value mid-range high-end current generation GPU, so the RTX 4070, and 8% better value than the 7900 XTX. So while not amazing at $650 US, if you could buy it for that price, it would be a decent alternative to the other offerings at this performance tier. Of course, it's the retail pricing that's probably of most importance to you, so we'll take a look at the typical Newegg pricing for these GPUs. Here the 7900 GRE, like most current generation GPUs, makes little to no sense. While it's certainly better value than the 4070 and 4070 Ti, both of which only come with 12GB of VRAM mind you, it simply can't hold a candle to the value of previous generation parts like the 6800 XT. The GRE is currently 14% more costly per frame than the 6800 XT, so even if you could buy it, you'd likely be better off buying the older RDNA 2 GPU at the current discounted price of $530 US. Alternatively, the 7900 XT, that can be had for $750 US, and at that price it's also better value than the GRE. You also get 20GB of VRAM, which probably isn't super important, but it's also a nice bonus for a product that's already better value. So in short, the GRE, if it were to be sold as a do-it-yourself item, it would need to cost no more than $600 US to compete with the existing $750 XTs and of course the outgoing 6800 XTs. When compared to the outgoing 6800 XT, the big advantage of the 7900 GRE is power efficiency, though it's probably not a massive factor overall. In Hitman 3, we saw total system consumption reduced by almost 70 watts, and that's a 15% power saving, so quite nice. That said, we only saw a 10% saving in Spider-Man Remastered, so about a 40 watt reduction in that example. So the 7900 GRE, it's not always going to consume significantly less power than that of the 6800 XT, but it's still certainly the more efficient GPU. Now, it's my understanding that only AMD's reference version of the GRE will be available, and that's certainly the case for now. Also, only AMD and their exclusive partners such as XFX, Sapphire, and PowerColor will be selling the GRE. In terms of design, the GRE reference model looks almost identical to the 7900 XT reference model, though there are some key differences. The GRE backplate, for example, measures 267mm long and 96mm wide, whereas the XT backplate is 276mm long and 99mm wide. The coolers are also very different. The GRE cooler weighs 737 grams, whereas the XT cooler is 46% heavier at 1078 grams. So the XT is slightly bigger and much heavier. Over on the PCB, the GRE features 2 fewer power stages, and of course there are 2 missing GDDR6 chips, which reduce the capacity from 20GB to 16GB. And then as far as power input goes, it's still using 2 8-pin PCIe power connectors, and then for the I/O, we find the exact same configuration. The only other noteworthy difference is the GPU itself. Now the GCD and MCD layout and dimensions are exactly the same as the XT and XTX models, but as I noted earlier, 2 of the 6 MCDs are disabled. But what's really interesting is the package itself. Whereas the XT sits on a 54mm by 47mm package, the GRE uses a much smaller 40mm by 39mm package. And this is likely the design that we'll see the 7800 XT adopt with its fewer active memory controllers, and I assume this is how AMD has been able to shrink the package here. And just lastly, here's a look at the operating clock speeds and temperatures of the 7900 GRE reference card. After an hour of gaming load, we saw a peak hotspot temperature of 89 degrees and a junction temperature of 75 degrees. The peak temperature, it's not amazing, though a fan speed of just under 1400 RPM is reasonably low, and the card was certainly very quiet. The cores typically clocked at 1940 MHz, so about what we saw from the 7900 XT reference model, and as expected, the memory did operate at 18 gigabits per second. So overall, pretty decent results there, but not nearly as good as many of the custom AIB 7900 XTs. Overall, the Radeon RX 7900 GRE, it's a bit of an odd product. I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad, though ultimately you probably shouldn't buy it, and that is given that discounted 7900 XTs, they do offer more value, or alternatively, you can achieve almost the same level of performance at a substantial discount by opting for a 6800 XT. In the PLE system that I purchased, the GRE works out to be $1,100 Australian dollars, and although PLE aren't currently selling 6800 XTs, PC Case Gear is, and they're priced at just $850 Australian, and based on our data, that means the 7900 GRE costs $9.37 per frame, that's Australian dollars, whereas the 6800 XT costs $8.09 per frame. And that means the GRE is coming in at a 20% premium. Ouch. And worse still, it's possible to purchase the 7900 XT for as low as $1,170 in Australia, making it just 6% more expensive than the GRE, and at a cost per frame of $8.41, you'd obviously get that if you wanted a current generation GPU. That said though, in Australia you do have to shop around for those 7900 XT deals, and while there is currently stock for $1,170, both PC, Case Gear and PLE have their 7900 XTs priced up around $1,300. But even there you're looking at a cost per frame of $9.35, so still less than that of the GRE. So like I said, the 7900 GRE, it's an odd product, and I don't really know how I feel about it. I'm certainly not a fan of AMD picking and choosing when they sample products to reviewers, and I feel like it's really poor form of them to put a product out in the wild with a very similar name to existing products. There is no way this thing should be a 7900 series product. It's 20% slower than the 7900 XT, which is already a cut down version of the XTX, and it also packs 20% less memory than the XT. I personally think 7800 GRE would have been a much more appropriate name if they wanted to make such a product, though ultimately it probably should have just been the 7800 XT and just sold everywhere. Having said that though, we are expecting a product called the 7800 XT to be released next month, so it'll be very interesting to see how close that'll be in terms of performance to the 7900 GRE, and I guess price as well. For now, my advice is to be cautious of any system featuring the 7900 GRE. Certainly make sure that you price check your options, as the 7900 XT or even the 6800 XT could offer you a lot more value. Anyway, that is going to do it for this initial look at the 7900 GRE. Do let me know what you think about it in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you want to support work like this, we did spend a little over 2,000 Australian dollars just to get this graphics card. Like I said, it's worth about 1,100 Australian dollars, but we did have to buy some other components with it because it only comes in a system in Australia, and AMD wouldn't allow us to just get our hands on the card, even if we were willing to pay for it. So anyway, Floatplane, Patreon, all of our great members there help support content like this and allow us to justify spending way more money on this video than we're likely to make back. And you also get some pretty cool perks in return. So we have an exclusive Discord server for members only, great place to talk tech and basically anything else, and two of myself are active in there, our video editor Balin. It's a very cool place. We have monthly live streams. Tim and I get together and answer your questions live. Behind the scenes content, Q&As. Anyway, check it out if you're interested, but if not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.